Cahara is one of the 4 playable characters in Fear and Hunger 1. Beneath the exterior of a pragmatic and cunning mercenary, he embodies a distinct form of existence in the world of fear and hunger, where morality, survival, and freedom no longer have clear boundaries. This video not only analyzes the origins, journey, and symbolism of Cahara, from an abandoned outcast who survives by instinct to a reflection of humanity's yearning for liberation amid the darkness, but also delves into the human aspects and true motivations behind his actions. Through this, we come to realize that Cahara's story is not merely that of a thief, but also a tale of a man's profound love, one who dares to descend into the depths of a hellish dungeon for the woman he loves. He originates from the Eastern sanctuaries, a bastard child left on his own at a very young age. Somehow, this poor soul found his way to these dungeons. These are the words of the new gods, a secret order of self-proclaimed deities, when asked about Cahara, one of the 4 main characters who play a pivotal role in the story of Fear and Hunger 1. According to the information provided in the game, Cahara was born in the capital of the Eastern sanctuaries, Jataya. As a child who was born and abandoned at a very young age, with no one to guide him, Cahara's moral compass was shaped by a single principle: survival. Even if that meant becoming a pickpocket, a thief, or struggling to live an honest life as a merchant in the capital city of Jataya. From an early age, it seems that Cahara survived and grew up by joining various groups of mercenaries. Through these experiences, he learned and mastered the dirtiest tricks necessary to stay alive. His final stop before the main events of the game was becoming a member of a gang composed of criminals and disbanded veterans led by a notorious bandit. Let us take a moment to analyze the background of the place where Cahara was born, Jataya. This city serves as the capital and sacred center of the Eastern sanctuaries, a region located in the eastern part of Europa, known as the birthplace of the ancient god Almer. It is easy to recognize that Jataya draws heavy inspiration from Jerusalem, one of the oldest cities in the world, widely regarded as the holy site of the 3 Abrahamic religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The name Eastern Sanctuaries itself implies that this region holds significant religious and spiritual influence, much like Jerusalem, a city of profound meaning to the followers of faiths that originated there. While Jerusalem is considered a sacred city in Christianity for housing monumental sites such as the Temple of Solomon and the legendary Golden Gate, and is also believed to be the location where Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross, Jataya is renowned for being the birthplace of Almer, as well as the site of his crucifixion and ascension upon the cross, right before its own legendary Golden Gate. It is evident that the religion devoted to the worship of Almer has deeply influenced the city of Jataya ever since his ascension. Evidence of this can be seen even during the events of Fear and Hunger 2, Termina, where most of the local temples still venerate Almer, and his influence has spread throughout the entire continent of Europa. The Hebrew-inspired name Jataya implies that this region is modeled after the Islamic kingdoms and ancient civilizations that once flourished along the Fertile Crescent, an area that is today regarded as the heart of the Middle East. However, history has repeatedly shown that places deemed holy lands are often the very centers of conflict. Jerusalem, for example, was a blood-soaked battlefield of empires and crusades. Its sanctity did not bring peace. Instead, it attracted violence and fanaticism. In the 1st century AD, Jerusalem was under the rule of the Roman Empire. The Roman authorities and their local puppet kings, such as Herod, were ready to crush any sign of rebellion. At the same time, Jewish society was deeply divided into competing sects, constantly clashing with one another and with the ruling powers. This occupation became the root of lasting political and social tensions, igniting waves of resistance movements and the rise of extremist factions. The setting of Jetiah in fear and hunger also witnessed similar disputes and conflicts throughout its history. In the 16th century, the Kingdom of Rondon, one of the rival powers opposing the eastern sanctuaries, managed to occupy Jetiah for an unspecified period of time. Beyond being a site of recurring conflict, Jetiah also served as a major trade hub connecting the east and the west. The city was filled with the exotic fragrances of spices sold by merchants scattered along its streets. Its commercial importance mirrors that of Jerusalem, where goods once entered Europe and the Mediterranean through the Silk Road. As with many gateway cities, the rapid influx of wealth was unevenly distributed, leading to a stark coexistence of poverty and opulence within the same streets. Historically, Jerusalem was an essential stop along major trade routes linking continents. This brought prosperity to a select few, but also fostered a vast underworld filled with theft, deceit, and violence. Jetiah reflects this same paradox, a so-called Holy Land that is, in truth, a harsh and unforgiving place, a crucible where suffering and sanctity intertwine. Karen, a journalist and one of the 14 contestants present at the Festival of Termina in Fear and Hunger 2, once described Jetiah as a city where she had never seen such a clear divide between social classes existing on the same street. For a child who was born and abandoned, growing up at the very bottom of society, witnessing the lavish world of the nobility every day along those same streets must have felt like staring at an unreachable dream. Perhaps this stark hierarchy was one of the direct reasons behind Cahara's obsession with wealth and social status later in life. Growing up in such a harsh environment, Cahara could not believe in lofty ideals. To him, everything could only be achieved in two ways, either bought or stolen. In the context of Jetiah, choosing an honest life meant choosing a life of struggle, oppression, and the constant threat of death. Cahara realized that even if he tried to live honorably, that path would only bring him a few coins of savings, never enough to change his fate. Thus, becoming a thief or a mercenary seemed like the only reasonable decision. Yet, even that does not fully explain his deep-seated obsession, his willingness to risk his life for money and freedom. There was still something else, something that truly drove Cahara forward, something that never allowed him to stop. In the universe of fear and hunger, there exists a concept of souls. According to this belief, every individual is born with a unique type of soul that determines their nature from the moment of birth. A person's soul influences their personality, abilities, and even their profession, serving as the foundation for the skills they later develop. It is easy to notice the parallel between this system and the zodiac signs in the real world. However, unlike the 12 signs of the real-world zodiac, the fear and hunger universe currently recognizes 28 distinct types of souls, in addition to one unique and singular soul, the ancient One Soul, possessed by the girl. As previously discussed, a person's soul directly shapes their character, talents, and life path. For instance, those born with an enlightened soul often become scholars, librarians, or practitioners of magic, as seen in the cases of Enki and Nostradamus. Meanwhile, natural leaders and those driven by ambition or lust for power, such as Francois or Darce, are typically born with a domination soul. According to the character biography provided in the game, Cahara was born with an endless soul, a type of soul that embodies an insatiable desire for freedom and fuels boundless creativity. The endless soul is often associated with individuals of strong will and independence, those who possess the potential to transcend the cycle of reincarnation or escape predetermined fate. Its defining trait is a refusal to ever be satisfied, an unending pursuit of something more, a quality reminiscent of Prometheus or Lucifer in mythology. Another example of an individual who possesses an endless soul is Nilvan, the Endless One. She is said to be a deity representing continuity, freedom of will, and endless evolution. Like other beings associated with the concept of endlessness, Nilvan carries within her a will that resists rigid order, always striving toward individuality and self-created purpose. As I analyzed in the video about the god of fear and hunger, it is precisely these characteristics that continuously drove Nilvan to find a way to preserve her own era. This pursuit directly led to the birth of one of the most powerful entities, one that profoundly shaped the flow of events within the fear and hunger universe. Based on these details, it is reasonable to conclude that, much like Nilvan, the goddess of infinity who sought to break the cycle of the old gods, Cahara also shares similar traits. He carries a deep desire for a better life and the determination to risk everything by venturing into danger to change his fate, even if doing so goes against the survival instincts that had been sharpened in him since childhood. Through this, it becomes clear that the souls in the world of fear and hunger function both as a blessing and a curse. They grant their bearers innate talents and spiritual affinity aligned with their nature, yet they also act as a prison that confines and binds them to a predetermined path, regardless of whether they wish to follow it or not. In Cahara's case, the endless soul compels him to keep moving forward, even when what he truly desires may simply be to stop and rest. It is not difficult to understand why, when we encounter Cahara again in the void, his words there carry a somber tone. To him, death feels more like a release than a punishment. When his mind level drops too low, all he wants to do is sit down and rest. Sadly, those who carry the endless soul can never be content with an ordinary, peaceful life. Cahara could never become a merchant, a loyal soldier, or a quiet farmer. The endless soul drives him to crave more than that. It constantly pushes him toward dangerous choices, even when those decisions go against his own moral compass, urging him to live and be free like the wind. This explains why Cahara chose to join numerous bands of mercenaries and engage in many dishonorable acts in the past. He wandered across the lands during raids, attacks, and acts of plunder, until his path eventually led him to the kingdom of Rondon, a place where money seemed to flow freely, as long as one was willing to stain their blade with blood. Throughout history, there have been many people like Cahara. For them, becoming a mercenary willing to risk their life for money was never a matter of ideology or belief. It was simply the best option available in a world that offered them few choices. A notable real-world example can be seen in the condottieri, the professional mercenary leaders of Italy who operated during the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. They were essentially military contractors, hired by Italian city-states and lords through agreements known as condotta. The term originally meant contractor, but over time it came to refer to any commander or military leader. Historically, wealthy trading cities such as Venice, Florence, and Genoa often lacked standing armies, so they relied on these mercenary forces for warfare. The condottieri commanded groups of men who sold their lives for money. For these soldiers, loyalty was a commodity, and honor was a distant ideal. Their ultimate goal was to accumulate enough wealth and influence to escape their impoverished origins and rise to a position of status. The same can be said for Cahara. His motivation for entering the dungeon of fear and hunger was the promise of a treasure beyond imagination. His dream was to carve out an escape, to use wealth as a means to buy his freedom and a new life, to rise above the pit from which he came. This reflects a recurring historical archetype, the desperate ambition of those pushed to the edge, who must climb upward through cunning and violence. A grand ambition requires an opportunity of equal magnitude, and Cahara chose to stake everything on a gamble called Lagarde. The wheel of fate began to turn when Cahara accepted a perilous mission from the kingdom's officials. He was promised a vast reward, enough to change his life forever, if he could rescue Lagarde, the infamous leader of the Knights of the Midnight Sun, from the depths of the dungeon of fear and hunger. The Knights of the Midnight Sun were a disbanded mercenary order that originated from the continent of Europa. The name Midnight Sun was inspired by the natural phenomenon that occurs near the Earth's poles, where the sun remains visible even during the night. By the late 16th century, under the charismatic leadership of a man named Lagarde, the Knights of the Midnight Sun had risen to prominence as a formidable military force. Easily recognized by their emblem, featuring an eagle and a sword often emblazoned upon their shields, the faction rapidly grew in both number and influence. Their operations were initially conducted under the supervision of Rondon, the dominant Western power. At first, Rondon viewed Lagarde's army as a valuable asset. However, as the group continued to expand, Rondon began to see them as a threat to its existing authority. Alongside the military growth, Lagarde developed an increasing obsession with ancient relics and artifacts, an obsession that ultimately drove him to invade Oldgard in pursuit of the Cube of the Depths in the year 1590. Lagarde was willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goal, even resorting to violence and the slaughter of civilians and children. Despite suffering casualties, the Knights of the Midnight Sun succeeded in reclaiming the cube. However, this brutal act provided Rondon with the perfect pretext to turn public opinion against Lagarde and justify his eventual imprisonment. After their defeat at the hands of Rondon in 1590, the mercenary group was disbanded, leaving only two known survivors, Lagarde himself and Dars Catalyst, one of his closest and most loyal followers. For that reason, Lagarde was imprisoned within the dark depths of the dungeon of fear and hunger. Originally, this dungeon was used by the Kingdom of Rondon to contain war criminals. However, by the year 1590, a dark power began to rise from within, causing the kingdom to completely lose control over the facility. Shadows spread, and blackness consumed the halls, turning the place into a realm of death that no one dared to enter. Around the same time, Rondon was struck by a deadly plague that cast a pall of despair across the land. Rumors spread that the crypts and dungeons beneath the kingdom were the source of this calamity. It was said that poachers, lost travelers, and reckless explorers who ventured into the area never returned. Because of this, the officials of Rondon had no choice but to hire an outside sword like Cahara to infiltrate their own fortress. They could not send their soldiers in, for they no longer knew what awaited inside. All Cahara knew about the prison was that it was a diseased, perilous ruin filled with old traps and deranged inmates who had long since lost their sanity. Despite his survival instincts screaming and warning from the very beginning, his obsession with wealth and a better life ultimately prevailed. Or perhaps it was his endless soul that compelled him to keep moving forward, defying danger and the sickening unease of the task he had accepted. Hearing tales of vast treasures hidden deep within the ancient ruins only pushed him further, driving him to enter the cursed dungeon in pursuit of fortune and freedom, staking everything on a single gamble, all or nothing. On the surface, Cahara's reason for entering the dungeon seems straightforward: a mission and a reward large enough to change his entire life. However, when viewed in the context of the other playable characters, his motivation becomes far more peculiar. Darsh is bound by the oath of the Knights of the Midnight Sun. Enki pursues forbidden knowledge, and Ragnvaldr carries a divine command for vengeance. Cahara, on the other hand, stands apart. He belongs to no ideology, no order, and no power structure connected to the dungeon. He has no allegiance to Lagard, nor any obligation to Rondon. And yet, he chooses to enter a place that had already devoured an entire royal battalion. This decision contradicts everything Cahara seems to represent: a pragmatic man who values self-preservation and understands his own limits. Someone like him would normally refuse such a suicidal task. Based on what is revealed in the game's opening text, there is clearly something deeper influencing his decision. There is a person back in the city relying on you to return with riches. This line establishes that money is not his ultimate goal. It is merely the means to achieve something greater. Every action Cahara takes appears to revolve around a mysterious person waiting for him above ground, someone whose connection to him is powerful enough to make him accept any risk. In this case, survival is no longer his top priority. Instead, he is driven to act recklessly, as if bound by a promise that can only be fulfilled through danger and sacrifice. It is clear that in this mission, for Cahara, failure does not merely mean death, but also a devastating consequence involving another person, a personal loss that cannot be replaced. This makes his position among the characters of fear and hunger unique. On the surface, it appears that he entered the dungeon out of self-interest, but beneath that, Cahara carries a heavy inner burden and a deeply personal responsibility. This aspect of his character draws a strong parallel to the conquistadors of European history. The expeditions of the 15th and 16th centuries set sail for the New World under the promise of gold and riches. Yet their true motivation was often far more human: the desire to escape their social station and to secure a better life for their loved ones back home. Cahara enters Mahabre with a similar mindset. While the rumors of treasure may have drawn him in, what he truly seeks is a path to freedom, not only for himself, but for the person who means the most to him. This understanding invites a degree of empathy. After all, if placed in similar circumstances, most of us might also choose to take risks, or even sacrifice ourselves for the sake of those we love. This mindset has echoed throughout human history, across countless wars and conflicts, and it remains true even today. Whether as a soldier or simply as a man on a mission, the deepest and most enduring motivation has always been the same: to protect and provide for one's loved ones. In Cahara's case, the mission warning at the beginning of the game makes it clear: make or break mission. This is his one and only chance, a single opportunity. If he succeeds, he changes his life forever. If he fails, he loses everything, or worse, faces death or permanent scars that will never heal. At this point, one question remains unanswered. Who is the person waiting for Cahara back in the city? For now, their identity is still unclear, yet one thing is certain. Beyond the drive of his endless soul, the emotional weight of the person behind him is powerful enough to make even a pragmatic man like Cahara risk his life without hesitation. His silence when questioned about his true motivation serves as quiet evidence of this. In the end, Cahara's greatest fear is not the horrors that await him inside the dungeon. It is the thought of returning empty-handed, of facing the person who depends on him and realizing that he has failed. As time passes and Cahara descends into the dungeon, it becomes clear that he has mastered the lessons Jataya once taught him. He moves like a seasoned survivor, assessing danger, seizing opportunities, and abandoning anyone who no longer holds value. The choices presented at the beginning of the game, such as stealing, pickpocketing, or using others as a means of escape, perfectly reflect the instincts of someone who was once a forsaken child, surviving in the filthy streets of the Eastern Sanctuary's capital. The dungeon of fear and hunger does not change him. On the contrary, it provides the perfect environment for Cahara to make full use of the survival skills that shaped his entire life. The irony is that Cahara himself seems unaware that the very tricks he once considered dirty and shameful become his most vital tools for survival in this cruel place. At least, until the moment he is captured by the grotesque and perverse creatures that inhabit the dungeon. We first encounter Cahara, imprisoned in a cell located in the upper left area of the level 3 dungeon. Even for someone with remarkable survival instincts like Cahara, it is nearly impossible to escape the claws of fear and hunger. Things may not seem too dire yet, as his mind remains intact compared to the other inmates who have completely succumbed to madness. However, it soon becomes apparent that it is only a matter of time before the horrific darkness of the dungeon begins to consume Cahara's sanity, just as it has devoured everyone else who dared to enter. The deeper Cahara descends into the dungeon, the more his actions begin to reveal troubling signs. The first indication of this is his unrestrained fascination with the ritual known as the marriage of flesh. In a previous analysis, we discussed that the marriage of flesh is a ritual originating from Sylvian, one of the old gods, known as the goddess of love and fertility, disguised under the name love magic. The marriage of flesh is a sacred magical rite that binds two or more individuals, both physically and spiritually. It was born from Sylvian's twisted nature and her despair over humanity's inability to reciprocate her love in a pure way. This ritual stands as one of the clearest examples of how Sylvian interacts with the material world. To begin the ceremony, 2 or more participants must engage in sexual intercourse within a ritual circle, resulting in the permanent fusion of their bodies. The beings created from this ritual are referred to as marriages. Most characters react to this ritual with caution or disgust. Darts views it as an insult to her honor, while Ragnvaldr sees it as something fundamentally wrong and unnatural. Cahara, on the other hand, approaches the ritual with an unsettling mix of curiosity and acceptance. This response serves as a metaphor for the changes occurring in his mind, possibly as a result of his imprisonment, or perhaps because his psyche was never truly normal to begin with. It may be that his experiences in Jataya have dulled his moral boundaries. Behaviors that others see as taboo or immoral are to Cahara simply tools for survival. The dungeon does not corrupt him. Rather, it reveals how well he already fits into its twisted nature. The next disturbing event occurs when the player passes by the shit pit, described as a blood-soaked latrine, with seats smeared in blood, feces, and semen. The stench alone is enough to trigger an immediate wave of nausea. While other characters react with disgust or choose to avoid the place entirely, Cahara instead remarks that dying here would be a simple way to end everything. Even more revealing is his reaction during a confrontation. If the player chooses to fight him and hears the line, "Prepare to die," Cahara responds with a single word, "Always." This brief exchange captures his worldview perfectly. For Cahara, life has never been a gift or a source of joy. The curse of the endless soul condemns him to an existence of constant struggle. Death, in contrast, appears to him as a form of release, a momentary rest, a liberation from the eternal fight for survival. Another fascinating aspect of Cahara's character is his remarkable ability to communicate. Beyond his attractive and charismatic appearance, he is a master of persuasion, using words as weapons to achieve his goals. This could be interpreted as a manifestation of the endless soul, granting him a natural gift for manipulation and negotiation. The game makes this clear in the early stages, where one of Cahara's alternate backgrounds, aside from being a thief, allows him to begin the story as a merchant, emphasizing his sharp wit and eloquence. His tendency to call Dars dollface serves as both flirtation and a psychological tool, a way to maintain control in conversation while keeping emotional distance. At the same time, Cahara's admission of having relationships with both men and women suggests that he is unaffected by conventional moral or social boundaries. A darker interpretation, however, could imply that this fluidity stems from trauma, possibly hinting that he may have experienced abuse as a child. Cahara's relationships with other party members are relatively good, as he seems to earn the trust and affection of his companions, despite their contrasting beliefs. A notable example is the ideological opposition between Cahara and Dars. While Dars is guided by abstract ideals, such as honor and duty, Cahara focuses on tangible goals like money and survival. As the events progress and the lower levels of the earth open up, Cahara and the player eventually reach Mahabra, the city of the gods. Mahabre, also referred to as Mahavra in ancient texts, is an underground city that can be accessed through various means, using items obtained within the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. According to Miro Havrinen, the game's creator, The city's visual design was inspired by ancient Mesopotamian civilizations such as Sumer, Babylon, Akkad, and Elam. These civilizations exemplified early societies with highly centralized religious and political systems, where architecture and temples were built to bridge the connection between humans and the divine. The fact that Mahabre draws inspiration from Mesopotamia is no coincidence. It was in this region that the concept of a city ruled by gods first emerged. The name Mahabre itself is also a wordplay on the French and English term macabre, which refers to death or an obsession with death. This creates a powerful irony. Mahabre was once a city dedicated to gods, but now it stands as a decaying ruin filled with death and violence. A line of dialogue in the game captures the strange and otherworldly nature of Mahabre. Time and space do not follow the same rules here. The sun doesn't warm you, and death is not the same once you walk these streets. This immediately evokes comparisons to Anor Londo from Dark Souls 1, a city also known as the City of the Gods. With its radiant sunlight and breathtaking architecture, Anor Londo inspires awe at first sight. Yet all of that beauty is a lie. The golden light of Anor Londo is nothing more than an illusion created by Gwyndolin, the child of Gwyn, meant to deceive the player into continuing the cycle of the first flame, concealing the truth that the city has long fallen into decay and darkness. In a similar way, Mahabre was originally built to worship the old gods. Before the gods departed, they left behind clay statues to guard the city and appointed a single king to rule it. But that king vanished along with the gods, leaving the statues to wait endlessly in silence. It is likely that the city as it appears now is merely an illusion designed to deceive those who come seeking power or divinity, trapping them in the eternal cycle the gods themselves created. This theory finds support in the events of the game, as more and more individuals are drawn to Mahabre and ascend to become the new gods, believing themselves worthy to stand alongside the old gods, only to discover the bitter truth that they are nothing more than pawns in the games of greater entities. Despite this, Mahabre stands as a powerful symbol of human ambition. The wear of time on its stone foundations and architecture suggests that the city has been used and altered through many ages. The traces of looting, broken gates, collapsed corridors, and missing relics all serve as evidence that Mahabre has become a target for grave robbers and treasure seekers. People like Cahara, driven by desire, greed, or the dream of transcendence. By the time the events of fear and hunger take place in the year 1590, the world has once again fallen into a cycle of decay. Mahabre becomes the destination for those driven by ambition, individuals who seek to change either the world itself or their own fate. Among them are Cahara and Lagarde. Returning to Cahara's journey within Mahabre, he confronts Lagarde in his transformed state as the Yellow King, standing before the throne of ascension. It is here that Lagarde reveals his true intention: to ascend and become a new god. His transformation has already begun, his skin turning pale yellow with a faint bluish hue reminiscent of the void. Lagarde believes that by seizing divine power, he can reshape the world and lead humanity into a new era. In Lagarde's words, this is not an act of domination, but a project for humanity. He invokes prophecy and speaks with conviction, envisioning himself as a savior who will guide mankind into a new golden age, much like Almer, who once united humanity centuries before. From his perspective, such sacrifices are necessary to achieve a greater good. However, before this grand vision, Cahara refuses without hesitation. He argues that spilling countless lives for the sake of an idealized outcome is not worth the cost. To him, Lagarde's reasoning is fundamentally flawed. And it is precisely this distorted sense of logic that has led to the downfall of countless kingdoms in the past. Here, the difference between the two men does not lie in morality, but in their values. Lagarde focuses on the end goal, no matter the cost, while Cahara concerns himself with the immediate human consequences. Jataya, the city where Cahara grew up, was an environment where power, violence, and ideology were often used to justify oppression and war. He had witnessed far too many plans for the greater good end in personal suffering and loss. So, when Lagarde spoke of becoming a god to save humanity, Cahara saw only a familiar pattern: absolute power followed by uncontrollable destruction. Compared to the other characters in the dungeon, Darce enters it for knightly ideals, Enki seeks forbidden knowledge, and Ragnvaldr is driven by vengeance. Cahara, however, is the only one unbound by any ideology. He focuses solely on what can be measured: survival, money, and the specific goal he pursues. The essence of Cahara's worldview lies in the fact that he is not an idealist. He refuses to sacrifice tangible lives for an abstract vision. Lagarde sees the world in broader terms. To him, the deaths along the way are necessary sacrifices. When he speaks of becoming a god for the sake of humanity, Cahara hears only the voice of a tyrant. He sees through the arrogance and selfishness hidden beneath a beautiful facade of idealism. He does not believe in promises of paradise if the path to it is paved with corpses. Moments such as his concern for the girl further demonstrate that Cahara still possesses empathy and the heart of a human being. As for the girl, she is an abandoned child found locked inside a large cage within the dungeon of fear and hunger. Although the exact circumstances of her presence there remain unclear, her behavior and her fearful reaction to kindness suggest that she has suffered greatly from birth, enduring pain and neglect for as long as she has lived. The fate of the girl mirrors the very tragedy that Cahara once endured. Both were abandoned by their parents and left to survive in a cruel, unforgiving world. It is easy to understand why they formed an immediate bond, finding a sense of recognition and empathy in one another. Cahara saw a reflection of his younger self in the frightened child, comforting her with gentle words and gestures, while she, in turn, sensed the warmth and kindness buried beneath his hardened exterior. At least, until tragedy inevitably struck. One particularly revealing detail appears if the player chooses Cahara as the main character and discovers the knife item in the courtyard. Picking it up triggers a series of faint memories, flashes of Cahara as a young boy training with his father. We know that Cahara was a child who was born and abandoned. So this father was most likely the captain of the mercenary group he once joined. This situation strongly parallels that of Guts from Berserk, another abandoned child raised by a mercenary band. In Guts' story, the captain he regarded as a father ultimately sold him to other soldiers for sexual exploitation. Given that the creator of fear and hunger, Miro Havarinen, has openly acknowledged Berserk as a major inspiration for the game. The similarities between Guts and Cahara's backgrounds are unlikely to be coincidental. Combined with Cahara's disturbingly casual attitude toward intimacy with men, it suggests that he may have suffered a similar experience. The knife, carrying memories of his father, serves as a symbolic vessel for Cahara's complex trauma. After all, it is impossible for a newborn child abandoned at birth to survive on their own in such a hostile world. It is far more likely that, as with Guts, the mercenary captain found him, raised him, and taught him how to survive through sword training. Yet, in doing so, that same figure may have also inflicted the deep psychological scars that continued to haunt Cahara long into adulthood. When Cahara gives the girl a dagger to defend herself, the act feels like an unconscious imitation of the father figure from his memories. Her presence awakens in him a paternal instinct and a buried longing for the warmth of a family, something he has never truly known. This moment turns everything we thought we knew about the pragmatic mercenary upside down. The story takes a different path if Cahara abandons his original goal of wealth and instead focuses on survival and protecting the girl, escorting her to the destination mentioned by Nilvan. In this route, the story becomes deeply tragic. Not only does he fail to prevent the girl's ascension into the god of fear and hunger, but his own fate is sealed forever in the deepest level of the dungeon, where he receives death at the hands of the very child he tried to protect, now reborn as a newborn god. Her act, though fatal, carries the weight of mercy. Ironically, despite Cahara's rejection of the idea of sacrificing individuals for grand ideals, this ending transforms him into exactly that, a sacrifice for the evolution of humanity. Though tragic, it can also be seen as a bittersweet conclusion. As the girl frees Cahara from the chains of his endless soul, the curse that condemned him to eternal longing and restless pursuit. Alternatively, if Cahara remains steadfast in his desire for wealth and his promise to the mysterious person waiting for him in the city, his ending appears brighter, at least on the surface. Driven by his determination not to return empty-handed from the dungeon of fear and hunger, even after the mission to rescue Lagarde had failed, Cahara succeeded in finding the hidden treasure, the king's crown, the royal crown once left behind by the ruler of Mahabra. He brought it out of the dungeon and sold it for an enormous fortune. This wealth allowed him to purchase a luxurious mansion and, more importantly, to buy back the freedom of a woman waiting for him in Rondon, along with their unborn child. The truth behind Cahara's long-hidden motive is finally revealed. He was not simply chasing fortune for himself, but carrying the burden of a promise to the woman he loved and the responsibility of a father-to-be. This explains his unshakable resolve and his obsession with treasure. It was all for the sake of giving a better life and future to those he loved. "Just promise you do come back." These were the last words Celeste whispered to Cahara before he left her to enter the dungeon of fear and hunger. Speak of Celeste, she is described as a beautiful woman with long white hair, pale skin, small red lips, and gray eyes. She worked as a prostitute in a brothel within the kingdom of Rondon, and her relationship with Cahara became the driving force behind his descent into the dungeon. Due to her profession, she is often seen in a state of undress. Like many other women of her time, Celeste eventually found herself trapped in the system of prostitution that thrived in Rondon. Her dependence on the income it provided was absolute, to the point that even pregnancy could not stop her from continuing her work. Rewinding to the time before Cahara entered the dungeon, the journey of his mercenary band eventually brought him to the kingdom of Rondon. There, Cahara quickly sank into the city's criminal underworld, but it was also where he found a reason to live beyond mere survival. He met and fell in love with Celeste, a prostitute trapped in a debt-based slavery contract within a brothel. Their relationship became Cahara's greatest source of comfort. When Celeste became pregnant, his need for money transformed from simple greed into something meaningful. He needed to earn enough to buy Celeste's freedom and provide for the family he hoped to build. For a drifter like Cahara, Celeste was not just another fleeting romance. She represented the possibility of another life, a better life he had always longed for, but never believed he could truly have. She gave the skeptical mercenary something to believe in and offered a wanderer a home to return to. Her existence alone was enough to make Cahara, a man who once cared only about his own survival, willingly risk his life in the face of unspeakable danger to bring her happiness. This explains all of Cahara's actions within the dungeon. He prioritizes survival, using every tool, every opportunity, every choice to get closer to his goal. Unlike Darce, who acts out of an oath, or Lagarde, who pursues the ideal of unifying humanity, Cahara's decisions are guided by a simple principle. Saving one person he cares about matters more than any grand vision for the world. What makes ending S truly meaningful is not the wealth or luxury that Cahara attains. Its significance lies in the reconstruction of his humanity. From a man who once cared only for himself, he evolves into someone capable of setting outward goals, protecting and building a family. It marks a transition from pure survival to responsibility. This stands in sharp contrast to the path of Lagarde, who sacrifices his family and personal connections in service of a collective vision. For Cahara, tangible results carry real value. Materially, Cahara's journey is a complete victory. A mercenary from Jataya achieves what every condottiere could only dream of: wealth, status, and a stable life with the woman he loves. At first glance, it appears to be a happy ending, since Cahara has everything he ever wanted. But in the world of fear and hunger, there is no such thing as an absolute happy ending. The game reveals that even in luxury, Cahara can no longer sleep. Night after night, he sits awake, eyes fixed on the darkness, his hand never leaving the hilt of his sword. This is not the vigilance of a soldier. It is the classic symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, also called PTSD, a psychological condition that arises after someone experiences extreme trauma, such as war, violence, abuse, accidents, or witnessing death and catastrophe. In Cahara's case, the horrors he endured inside the dungeon have trapped him permanently in a survival state. The trauma he carries is the result of prolonged exposure to terror, a condition closer to what psychologists call complex PTSD. Throughout his journey, Cahara chose to become a survivor at any cost. He deceived, stole, and likely did far worse to stay alive. According to existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, humans are not born with a predetermined essence or purpose. We simply exist, thrown into the world without meaning. It is through our actions and choices that we shape our own essence. Cahara was not born a survivor. He became one through every lock he picked, every lie he told. Each decision made in the dungeon laid another brick in the foundation of that identity. This raises a painful question. Can a person whose nature was forged in hell truly live in paradise? For Cahara, the answer is no. The man he has become is no longer compatible with the peaceful life he once dreamed of. He has turned into a hollow shell, a puppet without a soul, trapped within the paradise he created for himself. This is the cruelest tragedy of all, one even more painful than death. The endless soul within him continues to push him forward, never allowing him to stop. It means that at some point, Cahara will once again grow restless and unsatisfied, compelled to move on until the day his body can no longer follow. At first, Cahara seems to fit the familiar archetype of the thief with a heart of gold, a scoundrel driven by noble intentions. In most stories, that heart of gold becomes the key to redemption. But in Fear and Hunger, the rule is reversed. His love for Celeste, instead of saving him, becomes his poison. Because he loved her, he descended into the dungeon. And it was that descent into hell that destroyed him forever. And so, we come to the end of Cahara's journey. It began with a forsaken child rising from the mud, becoming a man who walked through hell for love, and ending in a luxurious mansion. Beneath that facade lies a tragedy disguised as a happy ending. Cahara represents the image of humanity when pushed to the edge, yet still fighting to survive in a merciless world. A man both pragmatic and loving, selfish yet compassionate, ruthless yet driven by the simplest dream of all, a family. His ending leaves us with a haunting question. Does a happy ending still hold meaning if the path to reach it destroys the very person we once were? The answer I leave to you.